Hi everyone, welcome to AI from the Front Lines. My name is Beena Amanat and I lead Deloitte's Global AI Institute. And today on AI from the Front Lines, we have Caroline Say. Caroline, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you with us on the show today. Let's start with, you've had a fascinating journey. Can you share a little bit about your background, your journey here so far?
Yeah, thank you so much, Bina, to you and the Deloitte team for having me. So I've always been in Silicon Valley in tech and have worked for large tech companies like IBM, Yahoo, and HPE, and then started my own venture capital backed company called Compute Software. Along the way, have also served on boards. My first public company board was Rosetta Stone. The company went through a lot.
Yeah.
And then I currently serve on the boards of Morningstar in the financial services space, the Coca-Cola company, the beverage company, as well as SEMrush in the marketing analytics space. And so serve on various committees for these companies.
That's amazing. And so your career spanned from consulting at IBM to product leadership at Yahoo, executive roles at HP, and also founding your own AI-driven software company. How did these experiences prepare you for becoming a board member and providing strategic oversight?
My career has just given me a very broad as well as a deep view across different verticals, small and large companies, and entrepreneurial and established organizations. At IBM, I worked with numerous clients across different industries. At Yahoo, I dealt with changing business models and consumer preferences. At HPE, we had to transform our go-to-market and address evolving buyer personas and behaviors. And then at my own VC-backed company, I faced what it really meant to be an entrepreneur, right? So I'd
Yeah.
been an entrepreneur in large organizations, but it's totally different when you're doing it on your own.
Uh-huh.
And all companies are going through something, whether they're scaling the business and products, transforming digitally, changing business models and go to market, or going through some kind of organizational change. So all of my experiences have prepared me for strategic oversight of almost every situation a company can go through.
Before you went down the board member path, I'm very curious about this because we hear about this a lot, right? You have worked with AI in both consumer facing and also in enterprise context. What are the fundamental differences you see in how AI is deployed, developed, and measured for success in these two very different environments?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point and call out. I would say in consumer-facing companies, using AI is often thinking about engagement and scale, very much focused on personalization,
Yeah.
despite a very broad user base. And when you're in a consumer type company, I think of, my past experiences where consumer testing or research and very rapid iterations when it comes to testing, product development, and deployment of those products is kind of a big part of the DNA of many consumer companies.
Yeah.
In enterprise companies, though, you still have a lot of that, but also you also have buyers or users who want transparency. They
Mm,
have to deal with compliance. They're thinking about integration with existing workflows in the context of their businesses. And
yeah.
then they can only do things in the context of procurement and legal at their company, right? So usually there are some
Right.
constraints from procurement and the legal organizations. So the core technology may be similar, but the development cycles, the adoption hurdles, and of course, measurement of success are very different.
Yeah, and I see you're taking that part of your career onto the boards. You're spanning across multiple industries as well. And now, what are some of the similarities and differences, serving on such a diverse boards? What do you see as things that still stay the same, whereas there are threads that might look different?
Yeah, so I appreciate you asking the question because sometimes people ask me, why don't you just serve on a certain type of board?
Yeah, yeah,
And quite frankly, I love the breadth and the diversity. I get to learn so much from it.
yeah.
But in terms of similarities, all boards still seem to be grappling with profitable growth and growth more so than margins because of AI, because of everything that's been going on the last couple of
Yeah.
years. They're dealing with digital and AI capabilities, figuring out how that intersects with strategy, talent, and governance. And then there's another common thread, which is the need for speed, right? Speed of
Mhm.
innovation when it comes to AI to avoid becoming obsolete or
Yeah.
getting disrupted.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are other similarities. I would say, like cybersecurity is just always
Mm.
front of our concern, no matter the industry. But on the differences side, though, I see are that speed of innovation that I reference.
Yeah.
Companies just have varying speeds of executing or hiring talent differently. There's, I'd say, risk appetite. Of course, differences in the regulatory environment, how political or social issues might even affect the company.
Mm.
When you think about a company of a global kind of massive scale touching lots of markets, of course, those things come into play. And
Yeah.
then there's complexity of product development, depending on
Yes.
whether you're like a soft goods or a hard goods company, which then introduces supply chain or distribution type issues.
Yeah. I think we've entered this interesting era. In my role at Deloitte, I get to speak to a lot of boards, I've definitely seen an uptick in the interest on the topic of AI from boards, and the questions are getting deeper as well. Now, you grew up in the tech background. What are some of the differences that you're seeing, even in a board's journey, as they are trying to get their arms around an emerging technology like AI?
Yeah, I think varying boards are tackling it differently depending on how much of a need, right, emerging technologies or AI are affecting their industry and their products and their customers.
Yeah.
Um, Ultimately, I think of maybe four major factors in making an assessment about adoption or pursuing any kind of emerging technology. One is definitely alignment with strategy, right? So, is
Mhm. Yeah.
what we're going to be doing clearly supportive of the company's long-term strategy or vision? There's so much of that then that ties back to capital allocation, right? So, what do we need to invest in? Are we investing in the right amounts? Um, and third, risks. So
Yeah.
not just financial risks, but also ethics, reputational risks, data and privacy concerns, regulatory risks. And I would say fourth, a big factor of consideration too, is to think about the capability and
Mhm.
talent, right?
Yeah.
So, do are there the right literacy at the management and board levels? Do we have the right
Yeah.
talent across all levels and the organizational construct to pursue some kind of emerging tech or AI initiative?
Yeah, you touched on this briefly. How can the organization's board ensure that the AI initiatives align with the organization's values, purpose, and long-term goals?
Exactly.
What is there some dimensions to consider? How have you seen that evolving?
For the board experiences that I have, again, varying levels of how much of a sense of urgency there is,
Yeah.
right? In thinking about AI, for example, or any emerging technology as it impacts operational efficiency and operations or productivity inside the organization. I think a big question is getting asked, if not already getting asked, on how do things get used as a lever to drive
Mhm.
revenue growth?
Mm.
Right? And that's where, again, speed of innovation, hiring the right talent, those types of things come into play.
Now, I have to ask you this because of your strong tech background. Are you seeing any promising applications of AI that are driving meaningful innovation and impact across industries? And can you tell
Yeah.
a little bit about a few of those?
So I was thinking about this before we are having this chat, and very, very neat things going on. From my experience, a couple of promising applications of AI come to mind. The
Mhm.
first is the application of AI for the customer experience. So
Mm.
hopefully every company cares about their customers' experience. Imagine a world where customers can interact with AI agents who can be a salesperson or a customer service person at any moment, just
Mhm.
switch roles, right? So those lines between functions are really blurring.
Yeah.
And these AI agents can serve across roles and maybe even do more than basic support, right? They can do complex back office support, so you never have to speak to more than one person. Um, there are two other promising applications of AI that I've just come across recently. One is detection of micro expressions in people's faces.
Mm. Mm.
It's almost like you can
Yeah.
know and read someone's mind before they say anything based on
Yeah.
their micro expressions. And I even read about an artificial tongue that can simulate human taste. All right,
Wow.
think of these types of applications for product quality, product research or testing. Say you're in a manufacturing environment, you're thinking about product quality. This can do this at scale. And then lastly, there's this whole space of Gen AI married with agritech, biotech, life sciences.
Oh, yes.
Um, and one interesting issue coming up is a citrus greening disease. The orange supply in the
Yeah,
US is
yeah,
reduced by half since
yeah.
2015 because of a bacteria that infects the citrus trees and causes them to stop growing fruit or producible fruit. And it's predicted that in 25 years, the global supply of oranges will vanish. All
Mm.
right. And so there's an application of Gen AI to help speed up research to address this as a potential area. So just lots of applications where it affects the human population on a global scale, I think are incredibly interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And it doesn't appear to be a single day that passes when we don't hear about agentic AI, right?
Yeah.
Agentic
Yeah.
AI, autonomous AI systems. How should board members think about agentic AI strategically?
Yeah. Well, with agentic AI, it brings autonomy and decision
Mm.
making into like a
Yeah.
single kind of system, right? Or a set of systems. And that raises many new questions, like who's accountable for the system's actions, or how do we safeguard against unintended,
Mm.
outcomes if there isn't, very
Yeah.
direct oversight over it. And a big one's adaptability with respect to the organization and talent. Right? I can see why everyone will become a manager, for example, because they're
Yeah.
managing a whole set of AI agents, almost like people with varying levels of skills and expertise, and trying to plan for a specific outcome or goal, right? So very, very similar to any people manager, but now we're going to have to probably, right, do this at
Yeah.
scale across agents. So there are two of those, I would say, factors, right? Autonomy, decision making. How do we have oversight over that, and accountability over that, as well as adaptability with respect to the organization and talent. Those are the things that I think boards should really be considering.
Yeah, talent is one of the most crucial things for that an organization can focus on in this AI era, right? How can a board help an organization shape its long-term talent strategy and again align with the broader strategic goals, especially with the rise of agentic AI or digital labor, humans and AI working together. What's the board's role in this new world?
Yeah, so I'm seeing more and more, of course, this discussion happen at the
Mhm.
board level as well as within the committee. So I'll try to talk about both. Um, Boards, I would say they're focused on strategy, right? Usually there's an embedded strategy
Yeah.
discussion across every meeting or a major strategy meeting each year. And boards really have to figure out like what is the right talent strategy as it relates to the long-term AI strategy for the company or some major digital transformation strategy for the company, right?
Yeah.
So that means AI investments are coupled with reskilling programs, or there's a lot of discussion around workforce planning and cultural alignment across
Mhm.
organizations, almost like you would for any digital transformation
Yeah.
initiative. And then within, say, the talent and comp committee, I'd expect the committee to be discussing AI talent gaps and very specifically, like what are the obsolete skills, right, for the
Right.
organization? What new skills are needed then?
Yeah.
And how do we prepare the organization structure and culturally to be able to support any kind of new initiative, right, in AI? And of course, compensation, right? So I think
Yes.
the board really has to start thinking about ensuring that it supports management when it comes to budgets and maybe even spend, especially
Yeah.
as we're seeing how competitive that talent is,
Yeah. Yeah.
to ensure the organization's strategic goals can be reached.
So I get this question a lot in general, right? What is going to be the most important skill in this new era? And I hear everything from curiosity to agility. So, as a
That's a
board
great
member, what's
question.
your take?
So definitely curiosity and agility. Um, I think most critical skills would be kind of adaptability, so similar
Yeah.
to agility. All right. Very clear kind of systems thinking. It's almost like you
Mm.
have to think as a product manager now. So yes, AI agents might be able to do a lot of that work, but we still have to communicate with those agents and provide very clear instructions
Yeah.
and context as well
Yeah.
as, goals and feedback. Right. So it's almost
Yeah.
like clarity around thinking and communication becomes almost even more important and that ability to be able to work effectively with AI. So I think those are the types of skills that are critical so that leaders can, augment with AI and figure out how to use it in the most productive ways.
Yeah, we spoke a little bit about, the use cases, the most promising ones for AI broadly. Are you seeing any emerging or transformative applications of agentic AI?
I'd say that there are two big categories. One is in operations, so autonomous supply chain management, maybe even IT infrastructure that can manage itself. And then the other I alluded to earlier, which is knowledge work, right? So agentic AI systems being able to maybe handle end-to-end tasks, maybe take on the role of or partial role of lawyer, marketer, accountant, customer service reps, sales reps, right? So I think it's good to start experimenting in low risk areas now and build literacy at the board level.
Yeah.
But put governance frameworks in place before scaling those things. But seeing a lot of promise in those two categories of agentic AI applications.
So basically build the foundation to, be ready for the agentic AI applications. Love it. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is, we know and most of us acknowledge that AI is one of those breakthrough transformative technologies, and it's not like the cloud or, data management, data warehousing, which we had in the past few decades. This is one of those which could be truly transformative. And I feel that we are still in the early stages with AI in terms of not just the technology itself, but also how we are thinking about it. And I have begun to ask myself, are we really thinking big enough with AI? If this
Mhm.
is truly a very, very powerful technology, it
Yeah.
gives us an opportunity to, to your point, to rethink the workforce, but even fundamentally rethink organizations, right? I see a lot of work going into identifying use cases that can be, applicable for agentic AI or generative AI, right? So you more as at a use case level, but still fitting it into existing processes and constructs. Whereas I feel there is a fundamental opportunity for us to just start with the goal of the company, right? The organization.
Mhm.
Why do we exist? And from there, work backwards on what does this future organization look like? What kind of processes is needed? What kind of structures and roles? And I feel that there is a huge opportunity for us that we're not looking at. Do you see that coming up in your board conversations, whether with your peers or in the board meetings, or just engaging with others, thought leaders in this space?
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. It felt like just a few years ago we were talking about AI as a pilot project.
Yes.
And now it's like, okay, for certain companies or many companies, this might actually be mission critical to the business or its strategy. And I think as board members, we can help companies with a very outside perspective on the market landscape or competitive insights or experiences from lots of other companies. And so sometimes I do see some not so much blind spots, but just not a prioritization around, hey, maybe there are certain, for SaaS companies, maybe there are certain applications of AI that are just not going to happen with your front end experience. It's
Yeah.
going to sit somewhere else. Like customers are going to want to go somewhere else, but still be
Yeah.
able to leverage your data and your workflows. Right. And you still do have a strong value proposition in those areas. And so I think it's seeing things kind of on the outside, right?
Mm.
There's another topic that keeps coming up too with my boards around the go-to-market.
Yeah.
So how can pricing and changes to the business model
Mm.
now impact the business and maybe even be used as a lever, right?
Yeah.
So the distribution, kind of finding where customers might be or where the customers might be, which is somewhere else in the future, or the go-to-market pricing, kind of business model shifts. Those are kind of big topics around the boardroom and how AI might be a long-term, conversation
Yeah.
that we need to have.
So, Caroline, in addition to your board roles and your prior experience working in tech, you also advise and invest in VC-backed startups. And you've been recognized as a Silicon Valley Business Journal 40 under 40 honoree. So, with this broad perspective and being in the Silicon Valley, where pretty much a lot of the innovation is happening, can you share a story of something that inspired a fundamental shift in how organizations approach AI? What any lessons that you might have taken that might apply across industries for our audience here?
Yeah. So great question. I think one big lesson I've taken away is that companies need to treat AI as a business transformation initiative,
Hmm.
not just an experiment or something that we're just going to go implement, like yet another tech.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I went through these experiences, right, from the kind of hard CDs, licensed software to SaaS shift, from the kind of on-premise to cloud shift.
yeah.
And in all of these situations, right, do we have the right people
Ah,
and organizational setup to be able to, transform and be open to adopting something new, and then be able to, never mind, develop and
yeah,
deploy and measure it.
yeah, yeah,
It really needs to be a business transformation initiative and how you think about having the right capabilities to execute that.
yeah,
And I'd say another lesson is that AI success depends as much on talent and culture. So very
yeah,
much
yeah, yeah,
related to my first point.
yeah,
I'd say that most importantly, companies have to move even faster now, or
yeah.
they just risk disruption or obsolescence, right? So all those things about the organization, the culture, the talent, the right processes and setup are important for that.
So, Caroline, we do an annual State of AI survey and from the Deloitte AI Institute. And I remember distinctly last year, one of the insights, which really I think we all know intuitively, that came out was, there is a rapid development happening in the technology space. The technology itself is growing rapidly, but
Mhm.
the adoption of the technology in an organization moves at the pace of the organization.
Yep,
Right. It does not
absolutely.
move at the same pace.
Yeah.
Any advice to, there is a new LLM or new AI related phrase that comes out every single day. We are living in this era where there's so much happening in the core technology development. What's your advice to companies who are trying to just keep up with it? How do you handle this constant stream of information and how do you make sure that you're not missing out on it? What's the best way to stay on top of everything that's happening in the tech world?
Yeah, well, that is a hard problem. You're bringing up a very hard problem, because I think we're inundated now with even more content too, since
Yeah,
a lot of it's AI
yeah,
generated. And I'd say, trusted sources and resources,
yeah,
right? Those who have strong experience and expertise in these areas, kind of filter out the rest and really focus on what you can read about, learn about, take courses on, learn from your fellow peers on. Um, and then I think in anything when it comes to a major initiative in a company, it really starts from the top, right? The tone
yeah,
at the top, the board and the CEO. Are they going to be pushing for something? Are they educating and learning themselves?
yeah.
Right. Because if you don't have that support at the highest levels, I think everything just kind of falls through in an organization.
Absolutely. Caroline, you live in a world of this emerging technology and you're involved across the entire AI ecosystem, right? Right from the applications of AI to we're seeing what's coming next in AI. So, what is the next thing in AI? Last year was all about generative AI. This year, I think, has mostly been about agentic AI.
Yeah.
What are some of the new emerging AI technologies or trends that will come up next from your purview?
Yeah, I think you touched on one of them, which is agentic AI. So systems that can act a lot more autonomously or independently.
Yeah,
But a second is, I think, new possibilities in industries like healthcare, media, and retail, where information isn't just in one format. So,
yeah,
of course, not new, but we are dealing with multimodal AI, where models
yeah,
can process across different formats, and that really opens up, I think, a lot for these industries as examples.
yeah.
Um, and then the third is the rise of industry-specific models. So
Mhm.
instead of one size fits all, you're seeing a lot of early stage, mid stage, late stage companies that are doing very well to solve problems in a vertical specific area. And
Mm.
so I think where companies need to move quickly is building AI literacy and governance now, so they're ready to adopt these tools. Um, and boards don't, or executives kind of wait. They're really missing out when these capabilities do hit scale, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of, I think, promising applications and new types of trends, but ultimately the companies have to be prepared for when they can reach scale.
Yeah. There's AI is a space that, I've definitely seen having a lot of myths. And in fact, one of the reasons we started this series is to, bring to our audience what's happening in the real world and what to watch out for. So this is super beneficial. If you had to bust a myth for our audience, an AI related myth, which you still hear coming up in conversation and is just not true, what would that be? What's a common misconception that you still hear?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So great question. I think a big one is that we treat AI as a solution for everything, that it can solve or do everything. But there's still so many limitations. Like, for example, I recently was trying to do app development using a vibe coding application. And at least I have a CS background from the
Yes.
past to
Yeah.
know enough. But it just kind of went off and did its own thing, and it took me more time to figure out what it did and try to resolve the bugs and issues than I think it would have just if I had coded directly or if I knew how to do that directly. And so, and by the way, never mind, right? Security, infrastructure, deployment issues for scaled applications. That is a whole nother thing to go and solve for large scale applications. That said, what excites me most is AI's potential to really augment human creativity and problem solving, right? To help us do things that we just couldn't do before.
I love it. And I have the exact same experience with vibe coding. I have a CS background too. I
Yeah.
think it's when you know too much.
Yeah.
You feel like as I was talking to a friend of mine, he doesn't have a CS background, and he was actually very happy to do vibe coding because he felt he could move faster without
Ah, oh,
knowing the
interesting. Okay.
intricacies, right? Which was like,
Yeah.
oh, interesting. But then, how much of it is lack of awareness versus like, things like you mentioned,
Yeah.
security and yeah, all those factors have to be put in and unless you think about it proactively. So I'm smiling because I had literally the same reaction to vibe coding when that came out. I was like, I need to get my hands on this and see how it works. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think it'll mature. So one last question. What excites you most about the future of AI besides the augmentation for human creativity?
Uh, if we could just even get Waymo down here into Mountain View to pick up my children and drop them off at different extracurricular activities or school, I'd be very happy and excited about that.
Yeah.
But I think just true discoveries and just problems that we as a population have never been able to go and solve. I think true breakthroughs, right? Think like medicine or healthcare.
Yeah.
uh, next gen technology. I think that is what is exciting for me about the possibilities of AI.
Well, Caroline, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bina. Thank you for having me.
And thanks to our audience for tuning into AI from the front lines. Be sure to stay connected with the Deloitte AI Institute for more AI research and insights.